Try to be a little bit better than that. I know it's 8:30, but we can be a little more enthusiastic than that. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Western Oregon University Academic Excellence Showcase 2026. We are so excited you're all here. My name's Dr. Dave Beasley, and I work at the Wu Foundation here on campus and teach in the Literature Department. I'm also a member of the AES Planning Committee, and on behalf of the entire committee, thank you for being here today to help us celebrate the exciting research, scholarship, and creativity that happens across our campus. One of the great things about Western Oregon University is that undergraduate students have the opportunity to work directly with faculty here on research. In fact, every student who will be presenting today at the Academic Excellence Showcase actively worked with Wu faculty to put together their project. Each day across our campus, undergraduate students engage in the kind of research that is normally reserved for graduate students at many schools, and AES is a day to celebrate all of the hard work, the long hours, the rigorous scholarship that goes into that. So I think we've got some of our student presenters here with us this morning. Let's give them a round of applause. I also want to take just a moment and thank a couple of folks. Just like research projects, AES requires a lot of teamwork, collaboration, extra hours, and meticulous planning. So I'd like to thank everyone on the Program for Undergraduate Research Board and the countless volunteers across campus who made this day possible. I also want to recognize Maren Anderson there in the back. She is the director of Pure and the woman who makes order out of all of this chaos every year. So thank you very much for doing that. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for this event, Oak Tree Property Management and the Independence Hotel. Okay, now that we've thanked some folks and recognized some folks, let's get to our main event, our plenary speakers this morning. We have three phenomenal speakers for you. Each of them are going to talk to us about their research and what they've learned. And I think the coolest part of all of this is that they are all connected to Western Oregon University in some way, shape, or form. And so our first speaker is David Heil. What started as a child with adventurous wanderings in the Dalles, Oregon City Park later became a lifelong endeavor to encourage others to explore and discover the many wonders of the world with confidence and curiosity. David will reflect on his 50-year career as a scientist, educator, host of the Emmy Award-winning PBS science series Newton's Apple, OMSI administrator, author, and global consultant. His years at Wu were seminal in that journey. Although, David, when you were here, were we OCE or were we WASC? OCE, okay. So please welcome Oregon College of Education alum, David Heil.
Yes, indeed, Oregon College of Education. And when he was introducing me, you might have been confused. It wasn't the Dalles. I literally grew up in Dallas, which is, what, 8 miles that away, No, that's okay, but it always sounds like the Dalles. We used to have Christmas gifts always end up in the Dalles instead of Dallas. But yeah, this is all very much home for me. If you've been to Dallas, there's a gorgeous city park there, and I grew up very close to that city park. I'll tell you more about that in a bit. Let me find out a little bit more about who's here today first, and I'm sure others might wander in as we get started. So how many of you are currently undergraduate students here? And of that undergraduate student group, how many are involved in the showcase today presenting your research or your projects? Yeah, great. Faculty then, okay? Raise your hands. Great. Thank you, faculty, for supporting the program and being here today. Others, am I missing? Well, the president, obviously, yes. And, Dean of the Library, great. Yes, love libraries. More on that, too. All right, so I'm going to take an interesting approach to this. I'm not necessarily talking about a research course of study or a research project or particular outcomes of research, but the play that research has in life in general. The kinds of experiences that you're having as undergraduates right now, the experiences that your faculty have had, obviously, over the years, make this, as you said in the introduction, as David said, sort of a seminal opportunity in life to sort of lay the groundwork and a foundation for many, many other possible directions and things to do. And my career has taken a lot of wanderings, but that core beginning experience in research, set the stage for that. But there's someone else here in the room that I want to call attention to just for the heck of it, because he's a classic example of this full cycle. Dr. Brian Dutton, who's the chair of the science department here, was an undergraduate with me here at OCE. Graduated a few years after I did. We met as undergraduates here on campus. Right there, that's the full cycle. It's you know, it's like you're an undergraduate, you get that research experience, you get turned on to it, it's exciting. Your faculty mentors talk you into sticking with it. Mine tried, Brian's one. Morris Johnson convinced him to go on to graduate school, which he did, and eventually returned right here to campus. He's been here, what'd you say, 28 years now? That's what it's all about. So I'm going to try to focus on that element of this. And so students, think about where you are today and where you might be 40, 50 years from today. And that's me standing in front of you right now. So there's this whole range of what I call enduring characteristics or attributes or skills that come out of research experiences. And I'm sharing a number of them here. It's kind of 2 dense slides back to back. But these are characteristics that you may have already, which makes you inclined to be a researcher, but they're also things that will grow out of a research experience, an in-depth study experience. Clearly, curiosity is a starting point, but taking risks is something that's necessary in that realm of research and new discoveries. It's important to know that you have to recognize existing sources of information and what currently is known in order to set a path for yourself in an environment that's somewhat unknown. So it's important to give respect to what work's been done already. And also to remember, I used to tell students this all the time, it'd be pretty boring if science was just talking about stuff that someone else already did. It's much more fun if we do stuff new for the first time. So obviously classical science studies have a lot of past work exposed, but there's got to be room in there somewhere in the experimentation phase or the exploration phase where you get to do something that no one's done yet and discover it on your own as well. Experimental design, data collection, analysis, collaboration with mentors and colleagues, even from different fields, is also an essential part of a research experience, at least a robust one. You need self-direction, time management, obviously. You've got to have patience. You definitely have to have persistence. And out of that will come confidence and the ability to sort of keep at it and keep that cycle going in your work. Critical thinking, obviously. The ability to ask good questions. I used to do a lot of work with teachers and teacher training, and obviously had an education degree from OCE. And I used to say, especially in the science realm, I so wish that instead of the grade structure that we developed so many decades ago, where we reward what you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a space in there somewhere where we could reward what you don't know, but are willing to find out? You know, the ability to ask the good questions is a fundamental, essential skill for scientists. Attention to details, integrity, pursuit and preservation of facts and the truth. And lastly, very clear and concise communication, something that scientists took a long time getting around to, but they've gotten better and better at it over the years. Your work needs to be relevant. You have to be reliable as an individual presenting that work to the world that you fit into, and trust. And if I may, just this once, just go on record and say that, darn, if we had more citizens in this country with these attributes and skills, if we had more leaders in this country with these attributes and skills, we might not be in the fix that we're in today, because I think people would better understand what understanding means and where knowledge comes from and how it can properly be used. And when you think about things like facts and truth, we're in a world of hurt because facts and truth are not being played with fairly at the moment. That's it. That's the last I'll do of that. So I'm going to share with you my life story and just give you a little background of the various things that I did, but I'm going to continue to come back and reference or call attention to the kinds of things that those attributes and skills contributed in the work that I've done. Obviously, growing up in Dallas. That's a picture of my mother and I on the trestle of a railroad bridge, underneath the railroad bridge, I might add. She walked me out on the trestles over top of the gorge because as a kid she had done that. And she thought it was so cool, she thought her son should do that too. That's the kind of mother I had, and that's the kind of youth that I had. I was very curious. I grew up in Dallas, as I mentioned earlier, and how many of you have been to the Dallas City Park? It's just, oh, good. So you know, it's a gorgeous park, and the arboretum that's there now was wild when I was there. So it was just a whole wild. In fact, that whole west side of the park was wild, and we lived in a house up above that, so we had this little trail that wound down into the wild part of the park, and that was my haunt when I was young. And my mother was confident enough, and I was evidently self-confident enough to just disappear over that bank every morning, especially during summers and weekends, and reappear at mealtime. And she just knew it would happen. But, you know, a lot of folks wouldn't do that, I think. Great love for nature, obviously, plants and botany in particular, and that's why Brian and I have an affinity there. Morris Johnson was a major mentor for both of us here on campus, a faculty member who passed away a few years ago. Pretty normal youth, but nerdy, no doubt about it. This is growing up in the late 50s, early 60s. That's a sugar cube castle. I was fascinated with medieval times, but I built a sugar cube castle for school. Notice the pocket with all the pencils and oh my God, this is like definition of nerd. I was a Boy Scout, an Eagle Scout. It was a big part of my life. My father didn't live with us at home, and so I needed sort of exposure to those kinds of things. And he did participate, actually, which was great, but not on a regular basis at home. And then this last slide on the right, just for the heck of it, I threw it in because even though I was kind of nerdy and a science buff at the time, I also got into the arts, and so that's me playing Joe Ferrone in Up the Down Staircase. He's the hoodlum in the play. So I, you know, pulled that off with a leather jacket and a toothpick in my mouth and tried to play along. Two really important influencers early on. My mother, I mentioned her earlier. She was a librarian aide at Whitworth Elementary School in Dallas. My older sister, Kathy, who's also a graduate of OCE here at Western, award-winning kindergarten teacher, has written a lot of kindergarten curriculum, and terrific, and was a real mentor to me as I was growing up and thinking about education. Because my mother was a children's librarian, we had books all over the place, and I brought two, and I'm showing them to you there. If you don't know Harold's Purple Crayon, you know, these are old stories, obviously, but what's significant about Harold's Purple Crayon is that when he wakes up at night and he's not too sure what he's doing or what he needs, and he realizes, well, I need something else than what I'm looking at right now. I got to find my way out of this dream I've woken up into. He gets out his purple crayon and he just starts drawing what it is he needs. He draws a tree, he draws a boat, set it across the water with the waves. The reason I think this is important is that as a little kid, you don't really put that all together until much later in life, and you realize, how many times have I had to get up in the morning, take a purple crayon, and literally sort of draw something that doesn't exist yet to make it through that day, and get where it is that I feel I need to be by the end of that day. And so, you know, hats off to Crocker Johnson for a story that makes meaning even throughout your life. Another one, of course, I was a huge fan of Dr. Seuss. Now, not just the rhyminess, obviously, but Dr. Seuss. Again, are you familiar with this one? This is not a well-known Dr. Seuss book, On Beyond Zebra, but it's all about a kid, Conrad Cornelius O'Donnell Odell, who's diligently learning how to spell. And he's showing off to his friend how he can get through the alphabet A to Z. And the friend kind of looks at him and says, well, isn't there anything else? Isn't there more? He's like, no, stops at Z. And his friend goes, well, you can stop at Z if you want, but not me. And so he proceeds to introduce Conrad to this whole series of new extraordinary letters and what they mean and what they stand for and all, you know, typical Dr. Seuss. You know, flu stands for flubber bubs that float on the ocean like blubbery tubs. You know, it all rhymey Dr. Seuss stuff. But again, what's the piece? What's the, you know, Seuss was very good at this. He always had these sort of back-seeing thoughts about why he was writing what he was writing. And this story is about going on beyond what we know right now. So from a science perspective, On Beyond Zebra was just this, again, seminal early book I read as a kid. And I just kept thinking, well, there's got to be more than just A to Z. That's how science works, actually, going beyond Z. So just for a moment, let's reflect on how we do this learning thing, how we go about understanding things. And I have these two photos that just sort of tell this story visually in the faces of these little girls. Obviously, we start every day by coming to some new experience with our own existing ideas, preconceived ideas, theories, fears, trepidations. You can see it on the faces of these girls. They're scared to death. They're going to test this structure that they built. The teacher's about to put a book on it. You know, they're fearful. It's going to smash it. You know, like, what's going to happen here? But without this moment, without that intrepidation, without those advanced theories and thoughts, without the engineering and design that went into this, you wouldn't get the expression on the face they have. They're like, oh, what's going to happen? And the best thing to do, of course, is to test it and try it. And at that point, that's when we see what actually happens. So in life, if you can find that, you're successful at research, you're successful at learning, you're successful at testing and trying, and you'll probably have a very, very rich and happy career. But that look on that girl's face tells me everything I need to know about a scientist who has, you know, worked their way through a research project, published their first paper, presented at a conference, and is actually accepted by the world around you. So historically, then, as I came on campus here, started in '73. I was 17 years old. It was tough because I couldn't get financial aid. It was kind of a rocky beginning. I was a pretty poor student. But I got a job, a work-study job at Basket Slough National Wildlife Refuge. And it persisted for 4 years, which was great, as a biological aide. And this is my first exposure to research, actually, because not only did I sort of clean out the barn once a week, but we ran a hunt program at Basket Slough at that time. I doubt they still do that, but they had a hunting program, and I had to learn how to check people's shotguns when they came in the morning to be sure they were set up the right way, and we're using lead shot, and I didn't know a thing about shotguns, and so I'm busting them apart and putting them back together again. But there was a group at Oregon State University that was trying to study the subspecies of dusky Canada geese. And so we took measurements on every single goose that was taken off of that property for the entire hunting season. We aged them, we sexed them, we measured wingspan, we weighed them, and all that data went into a study at OSU. So for the first time, I was like gathering data with a purpose, and they were able to determine a variety of subspecies of dusky Canada geese as a result of that work. Wonderful exposure, beautiful place to go to work every day. This is me actually on the left while I was on campus. Brian might remember this look. I only put that photo in there so you'd say, oh my God, has that guy had long hair like this his entire life? That's crazy. Not true. I had it when I was obviously here on campus. It just happened to grow ever since I left high school. I just let it grow, and it grew fast. It's a thick head of hair. And when COVID hit, 6 years ago, obviously you couldn't go out and get your hair cut. And the person that I had cutting my hair decided to retire in the middle of COVID. And I thought, I always thought someday I might do that again. And so I just let it grow again. So you're looking at another 6-year span of hair growth. I mean, I figure at the age of 70, if I can have a head of hair like this, why not? It'll probably disappear in a year or so because it's kind of a hassle in the summer times. But there I am. I'm on a farm above another wildlife refuge, the Ankeny Wildlife Refuge, just south of Salem. Again, I was a very poor student, had to have the work study, had to take extra time to get through school. But I answered an ad that was at the Student Center here, and they wanted somebody to do farm chores in exchange for rent and utilities. And so I went over and interviewed, and I got this job. I got this trailer down by the barn on a shorthorn cattle ranch, and I lived there for 8 years. I lived there while I was here on campus. I got a teaching job at Cascade School District over in the Turner-Almsville area. So I would go out in the morning, do the farm chores. I'd drive to Cascade School District, teach, come back, feed the cows, come back over, do the research that I was continuing to do here on campus, and come back to the trailer and collapse. But that's me standing in front of my Volvo on the farm. And that is one of my labs here on campus, which is in the building that Brian is chair of. I don't know, those labs may still look the same in some cases, but plant physiology lab. What's important about that is that you can see the years there. There's a 75, 76 gap. I went to Linfield for 1 year. I had an academic scholarship, so very proud of that. But I got a B in differential equations that year. And so my academic scholarship dropped. So I kind of came back to OC and sat down with the chair of the department at that time, Ray Broderson, and Morris Johnson. And they convinced me to return to OCE, because I'd had 2 years here previously. And at that point, that's when they offered me my first research opportunity. And so it wasn't just the research opportunity. I got an office and a lab as an undergraduate. It was like, okay, I can do this. So the first project was in the plant physiology arena with Ron Kuhlbaugh, who later went on to Purdue University. 2 years, data gathering, looking at gyrolic acids and responses for growth hormones in plants. First paper published with Ron and Charles West, who was a very renowned plant physiologist at UCLA. So I was just delighted to work in that kind of ethereal domain as an undergraduate. I got to present at a plant physiology meeting, which was a little scary. I had that long hair, obviously, and got up in front of all these experienced researchers and presented my results. And a few of them challenged my results, which like my knees were shaking. But I had that data. I had real data. So even though I got challenged, I knew what I'd found. And I was able to challenge back with that data. I then got a position that was paid, again, helped pay the bills, obviously, with David Jennings, who was here on campus for, I don't know, maybe a decade or so. And he had a subcontract with the Lawrence Livermore Labs and the Department of Energy looking at radioisotope residues in the Pacific Islands when they had done the bomb testing. This was remarkable stuff. And he had a lab down in the basement, and across from the lab, there was a counting chamber, which I'm sure isn't there anymore, but it was all lined with lead, so we could go in there and count americium, strontium, these radioisotopes that we were plating. It was a really caustic chemical process, fascinating chemistry. It was like a 120-step process to get this radioisotopes plated on this little metal plate, and then we count it in a machine and see what the radioactivity was. What we were doing was quality control. So we were setting up dummy samples and slipping them into research test samples. So we knew exactly what the counts were on those samples in the mix. But when we sent them to international labs all over the world to be tested, they came back with their data and their counts from the islands, samples that they got, but they also had our samples measured. And so if our samples came back with different numbers than what we had anticipated, we couldn't trust their